All right, we're going to start the open source stage just a bit earlier, so we give a bit more time to our speakers of the panel. Before that, I'll just give a short intro from GitNation. I'm Robert, by the way. I'm one of the organizers since the very first React Amsterdam meetup at first, and then the conference. So it's already fourth conference, and really glad to welcome you here. Hope you're having a good time. And one of the things that keep us going as organizers, as we're still doing full-time development job ourselves, what motivates us going and motivates us to not burn out or not get stuck in routine is constant experimentation. We constantly add some new stuff. This year, we added advice launch, we added food trucks, we added quite some new decorations. And from React Day Berlin conference, that's another one we're organizing, we introduced open source panel stage, which is in addition to lightning talks, because we always have like a really long lunch break for an hour and a half, and we thought that not everybody need that much time at the end, and there's so much great people with great content and projects that would love to show it to the audience over here. So what we basically usually do, like a week before the conference, we send a message to all the conference attendees and offer them to show off their open source project. And we usually get enough submissions to gather a small panel. And our goal and success is basically if any of next speakers after me will find another contributor, or if at least few commits will be landed to their repositories after their presentation, it will be a huge success. After all, the company that is umbrella company for React Amsterdam and a bunch of other ones, we're doing exclusively events. We don't have any other like back motives. We started with events, we're doing meetups and conferences all the way through, and basically everything we're doing is based on open source, so we are always looking for ways to give back. So we also came up with this new thing, kind of open source citizenship, which is obviously not legal, but like legally possible, although we would like to be. And we start with open source citizen passport covers like this, giving away to all the speakers and some of our partners. And we'll probably, as we go, also go forward, and on next conferences we'll be giving away those. Or definitely, if you're contributing to open source project, we'll probably do exclusive gifts for yourself. And a few more things before I give the mic to the presenters, or a few other conferences we're organizing that are relevant to this current crowd. So right now, as a GitNation, we're doing 3 React conferences and 1 JavaScript. So JavaScript is rotating during all the breaks. It's called GSNation, Amsterdam GSNation, obviously in Amsterdam, early June. And we do 2 other React conferences. The next one is in London, and that will be the first edition on October 25th. So if you want to visit London or you're living there, as we have around 150 people from UK, please do visit us. We also have free meetups there quarterly. And we also run React Day Berlin conference that we just wrapped up the 2nd edition last year. It was really huge success. We gathered also quite a big crowd. Yanni been also emceeing there, and we're definitely returning. So React Day Berlin this year will happen December 6th. So if you're from Berlin or Germany or nearby and you're not enough with one conference, feel free to just follow it. A lot of ideas that we try out at different conferences, they flow across multiple different events. So you can expect at least similar level of quality if you enjoy today's conference. And that's it from my announcements. So we'll have basically 4 people on the panel, starting with Gert. Gert will give a talk about his open source project called React Async. Obviously, he'll be the best to explain it in more details. But meanwhile, let's give some hands to Gert.
Thanks, Robert. Great introduction. All right, thanks. Hi, my name is Gert, and like most of you, I build web applications for a living. A common theme when building web applications is that they need data, right? For something to be useful, you probably want to show something off of a database from the backend. So applications need data, and despite the fact that we now have GraphQL and Firebase and the like, the reality is that most of the time we're still dealing with REST APIs and probably using fetch to communicate with the server. And also, applications send data, and your users are probably expecting your application to respond quickly to their actions. Unfortunately, HTTP, the underlying protocol, is very unreliable. Requests can be slow, requests will definitely fail from time to time, and requests don't necessarily finish in the order that they were sent. So when you're going to be fetching data in React, you manually have to deal with managing the state that surrounds the promise lifecycle that you get with the fetch API. You have to take care to ignore any completion of a promise that can occur after a component in React is unmounted. Otherwise, React will throw a warning at you. And you need to think of dealing with race conditions. For example, you're sending multiple HTTP requests in quick succession. They don't necessarily return in the same order that you sent them. So enter React Async. React Async is a project I've been working for the past year. It helps you deal with promises in React. So React Async is entirely built around promises. So you can use it with async await, or with promise.all, or promise.race. Whatever gives you a promise, you can pass it to React Async. And then React Async will handle the pending, fulfilled, and rejected states that a promise can be in for you. So it becomes really easy to show, for example, a loading indicator or other error handling, for example. It will also deal with cancellation of promises that no longer are relevant. For example, if you submit a button 3 times, it will only look at the last one. And also, it allows you to abort the underlying HTTP request that might go with it using the abort controller API. And finally, it can defer execution of promises until it is manually triggered, for example, when a user is submitting a form. So let's look at an example. You want to see some code, right? Well, the original API to React Async is the async component. The async component takes a promise function, that is a function that returns a promise, and we do it this way so that React Async can deal with the scheduling for you. And it allows you to, for example, reload a promise when it fails. And then the async component has several subcomponents for each of the states that this can be in. So async.fulfilled will only render when the promise has been fulfilled with some data. And then we offer a render props API to show some data on the screen. Now, we're living in the new time, right? We have hooks. So obviously, there's also a hook now. It's called use async, and it takes the exact same options that the async component does, but with a hooks native API. So it just gives you an object with data and is loading state and, for example, an error or whatnot. And because most of the time you're going to be using use async with the fetch API, there's also a use fetch hook. And the use fetch hook is essentially a thin wrapper around the fetch API coupled with use async and sprinkled some additional logic on top. For example, if you give it the correct headers, it will use this to automatically deserialize JSON for you. All right, so the elephant in the room is, what about suspense? If you've been aware of what's happening around suspense, you're probably thinking right now, so why should I use this if suspense is coming? Well, I can throw a promise at you that React Async will eventually give you a free upgrade to suspense. Of course, there's an asterisk there. It totally depends on where suspense is actually going, because it's not near finished. I expect it to be in Q3. But I'm actively working on making the upgrade to suspense as seamless as possible. And then finally, I have something I've been working on recently, and I think that's pretty cool. It's DevTools. So the idea here is that with DevTools, you would be able to add certain latency to your HTTP requests or pause them altogether, which makes it way easier to develop your loading state, because right now it's quite annoying to deal with. All right, so if you like this project, please check out react.async.dev or just install it from npm. And thanks for listening.
Okay. Hi. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers of this amazing conference, and of course, to be here on the stage. My name is Vicenzo Ferrari, but I'm also, they usually call me Wilk. I'm Italian, ciao. Sorry. I'm a software architect, and in my spare time, I do open source. Last year, Node.js shipped an experimental feature called worker threads, available with the experimental worker flag. Worker threads enable multi-threading programming for intensive CPU operations with JavaScript. They share memory, and they communicate via messages. Here's an example of worker threads. As you can see, there's just a single file that is executed by both the parent thread and the worker. The parent thread is pointed by the red arrow, and the worker thread by the green one. Now, it basically calculates the Fibonacci of a provided number. The native APIs of Node.js for worker threads use the event pattern that are really useful when you have to deal with long-living workers. But what if we just want to execute a little piece of code of our application in a separated thread? Let's say an anonymous function. Now, some languages, such as Golang, do it in a smart way. Here's the same example written in Golang. As you can see, there's just an anonymous function invoked with the reserved word go. And this scope is shared between the two workers. That's it. Easy, right? Now, with this idea in mind, I've created Microjob. Here's an example of how to use Microjob in your application. You wrap your anonymous function inside the job API, and you're done. Microjob comes with several interesting features. It has a worker pool that basically spawns a set of threads in advance, so they can be used later by your tasks. It has a self-healing features, so you don't have to worry about dying threads because the worker pool will bring them back to life. It is easy and simple to use. Just define an anonymous function and then handle it via promise interface. It provides synchronous and asynchronous operations with the await async pattern. And then there's this fantastic feature called shared context that basically shares the scope of the parent thread with the worker. Finally, the library is written in TypeScript, so it is type-friendly. Now, this is an example for the async operation. Instead of returning the Fibonacci result to the main thread, we want to store it in a database. And here we can achieve it using the await async pattern. Another example with the shared context API. The Fibonacci function is now defined inside the main thread, but then it is visible also in the worker, thanks to the context API. Microjob is an open source project, so please contribute. Open pull requests on GitHub, improve documentation, do testing, and of course, if you like it, share it. Thank you.
So who's ready for some GraphQL? Yeah, all right, good, good. So before we get to that, very quickly, my name's Andy. I don't usually do big talks like this, so that's kind of how I'm feeling on the inside right now. Go easy on me. Yeah, my Twitter handle's there if you want to check it out. And I work for Formidable. So we are a JavaScript consultancy, and we also do a lot of open source around React and JavaScript. So definitely check us out if you haven't heard of us. So who knows what URQL is? Just like a quick show of hands. All right, so it's literally like the 5 people I spoke to earlier. Right, OK, so URQL is a GraphQL client. So yeah, we're aware of Apollo, and we're not necessarily trying to take him down, at least not openly. But yeah, we've essentially just made our own GraphQL client, which we think solves a few problems that we'd like to solve with our own client, I guess. So it's React first. We have a hooks API, but it's also usable outside of React. So if you want to use this in Angular, I don't know why you'd use Angular, Vue or Node, you can go ahead and do that. And it's also like the key point, I guess, is extensibility. So we wanted to make a API which is very easy to add things to and tweak and make it your own. So out of the box, URQL is ready to go to start doing GraphQL queries, mutations. It's got caching, all that good stuff. But if you do want to implement your own cache or mix things up, you can do that as well. So I'm going to quickly show you what it looks like in React. So this is just a little component which renders a list of to-dos. So at the top here, we've got, we're importing use query from URQL, as you'd expect. And then we've got our query here. So we're going to fetch some to-dos. We're going to get the ID, text, and whether it's complete. And then you can also see as well that we've just got a type here for the to-do item itself. Now, personally, I think like this is obviously thanks to hooks. We've got a way of doing this which is really quite clean. So we specify, we got a use query. We're going to say the type is an object which has an array of to-dos. That's what we're expecting to get back. And then we specify our query. So we say query is to-do query. And then we get a response object back. And that response object is going to give us all the state that we would usually put in the component or in Redux. But that's straight in the component now, so we don't need to worry about that. So you can see that we can see if it's fetching. We're just going to show the loading overlay. If we have an error, we're just going to go ahead and render an error component. Otherwise, we're going to render our list of to-dos. So we've got an API like that, and if you can imagine that, but for mutations, very, very similar. Feels quite natural. A lot of the APIs for fetching stuff with hooks are quite similar anyway right now until we get suspense. And yeah, I did mention extensibility. So I'm going to try and explain this and probably absolutely butcher it. So if no one understands, if you can all just like smile and nod, it would make me feel like a lot better. So like exchanges are the way in which we try to do extensibility. So those circles there resemble an exchange. So an exchange is just like a hot pluggable thing that takes an operation and either returns a result or passes it on to the next exchange. So if you imagine that you're fetching, you've got a query coming in, and you want to be able to use a cache, you could stick your cache exchange between the incoming request and the actual fetch exchange. And boom, you've just added your own caching. So if you can think of some use cases for this, off the top of our heads, at least the team working on this, we've been thinking about debugging. So we could add an exchange which like logs to the console all the queries coming in. You could also use it for cache or even stubbing. So imagine if you could take out the fetching aspect of URQL and stick in your own, which maybe like just returns stub data. Like the possibilities are pretty open at the moment. I'm not going to go into this too much detail, but that first example of like logging to the console all the incoming operations and then printing them out and then printing them out when the responses come through as well. And we did that with our own exchange, and it took 16 lines if you take away imports and linting rules, a little bit less. So it's it's pretty flexible, and we think it solves the problem of having a complex API while also being able to customize it. So you know the drill. If you want to add it, you can use yarn or npm or whatever you choose to use. And if you like the API, we also have an API called Tipple, which does a similar thing but for REST. So definitely worth checking out. So yeah, so check it out if you're interested. Definitely experiment. We don't know what the capabilities are of exchanges yet, so maybe you'll create your own exchange, which would be game-changing. Maybe no one will contribute exchanges, and then there's that as well. But yeah, and then let us know as well. So we try to be pretty active on the repo and online. So if you have any thoughts or questions, let us know. So yeah, thanks, folks.
How many of you have heard of Git history? Raise your hand. Nice, 10%. That's nice. Okay, so 2 months ago I was working on this text effect that switches between 2 snippets of code, animating the lines that changes between both snippets. And I thought it would be cool to plug this to the GitHub API to fetch all the versions of a file and animate the transitions between them. So I made this that also use the same URL structure as GitHub, so you just need to change the domain, and it loads all the versions of a file, and it also has some information about the commits on top. So then I posted this to Twitter. By the way, I'm Pombo on Twitter if you want to follow me. And I posted it as a cool experiment. I wasn't expecting for anyone to actually use it for anything useful. But people liked it a lot. It has like 8,000 likes. That's like 8,000 more than the rest of my tweets. And it has also the same reception on Reddit. It went to the front page of Hacker News. But I was feeling like this person on Reddit, like it looks cool and all, but what is the use case? What are you using it for? Is it useful? Or this one from Hacker News, like we already have Git log or Git blame. Why do we need Git history? And then people started to create issues and pull requests. And so it didn't just look cool, it was also useful for some people. They were actually using it. So I decided to give my own project a try and started using it. And I noticed that even when I could use Git log or Git blame, using Git history felt like more intuitive. For example, once I was trying to find out when this section of the documentation from the MDX deck documentation, if it was outdated or not. So instead of using the Git blame here, I used the open in Git history button, which, by the way, is added by a Chrome extension. It also works in Bitbucket and GitLab. So clicking this, if I have Wi-Fi, or if I can click it, yeah. It loads all the versions of that file, and I can browse those versions just using the arrow keys, and I can easily see when and what changed. So it was nice. And after that, I started using it more, added more features. Like, for example, this is the CLI that works also with local repos. And I don't use this too much because I use VS Code, and for VS Code, there is an extension. Let me show it to you. This is the package JSON from the React repo. If I run the git file history command, I now can browse all the versions of the package JSON, and let's see, for example, when was the scroller dependency added? The scheduler dependency added. It has a lot of changes. For example, I can see that in September last year, the React scheduler was as a dependency. By the way, I don't know how to do that with git log or git blame. And well, that's all I have from Git history. But before finishing, I want to come back to these comments from Hacker News. Specifically this part that they are baffled that people don't read the manual. I think this is why in Git history some people like Git history, because you can use it without reading the manual. And now that there are a lot of tools that it's trendy to be hashtag zero configuration, I would love to see more hashtag zero documentation too. But wait, that doesn't mean we shouldn't or we should stop writing documentation. It means we should make or try to make our tools so intuitive that our users don't need to go to the documentation. And that's all. Thank you. Keep clapping.